So right now, MLS has proposed but not accepted this icon rule. So last week, our king, Tommy Scoops, and his team at The Athletic broke some news that MLS's roster rules were going to change, like confirmed, assured. And we covered that in last week's episode, so make sure you go check that out if you haven't. But there were some that were talked about but not passed and may still be on the table. And one of those being what is labeled the icon rule. So essentially what this rule would do is it would allow MLS teams to re-sign players that are 33 years old or older, who has played more than 4 years at the club, to a DP level contract, anything that they want, but only at a $200,000 cap hit. So with that information, Connor, I want to ask you your thoughts on the rule that was proposed.
So I'm not normally on the side of the MLS haters, but in this case, I think I am. I just don't understand why we need to implement a rule for this and make things more complicated when I agree with the anti-MLS crowd and that the goal should be to make roster rules less complicated and less restricted. And I feel like implementing a rule like this, not only is it making things more complicated, it's adding a new rule that like people have to try to figure out, follow along with. But I feel like it's encouraging the wrong type of signings. Like the league has been moving in the direction of developing talent that's young and selling it on for profit. And adding this in is only encouraging teams to buy players that are more along the lines of like an aging Nico Lodero who's, kind of waning down on his career. I saw people calling it the Carlos Vela rule, probably because he'll be a target of this as well. And the article mentioned like I think it was the Athletic article on this, but it mentioned, I don't know if it was a quote from somebody or if it was just the author adding this in there, but they talked about, the league should be looking to get more signings like Cucho Hernandez and not signings like Carlos Vela and Nico Lodero. And I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I think adding the one-off veteran for the little bit of spark plug off the bench and whatnot and getting the occasional game, I don't think that's a problem. I just don't think we need to implement a rule to encourage teams to want to do that in order to get like a cheap salary cap win there.
Yeah. So listen, I am in agreement with you, in which I am in agreement with the anti-MLS movement, which somebody clip it because it won't happen often, right?
Make it go
Um,
viral.
yeah. So here's the way I see this, right? I don't really care for the rule. I don't think it's needed. I don't think it's necessary. Uh, if they implemented it,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
like
mad.
whatever. Who
Whatever,
cares?
right?
Like,
So I'm going to start with the negatives first, and then I do have an idea of how it can be a little bit positive. And I'll take see if you've thought about it that way at all. But again, the negative side we've talked about a lot, trying to shed this retirement league stigma, like you just mentioned, and um, you know, anybody who watches the league regularly knows that's not true. But again, the people who are watching it maybe for the first time, the people who are looking at it as a not European top five league, and that instantly means it's going to be a retirement league. Um, they won't be bothered to confirm that. So now we're trying to tie up roster space and spending money on players who are, to use your favorite term, well on the wrong side of 30, right? And likewise, the minority of, this anti-Twitter MLS hive who never would have watched the game regardless of if this rule came into play. They're all screaming, "Oh, this is too complicated. How's anybody going to follow this league? We can't understand the rules," which I don't buy, right? I don't buy that gimmick. It's Americans understand complex roster rules. I mean, or don't care enough about the roster rules to care about the league, right? What the heck is a bird in the NBA? I don't know. But I'm going to hit him with the bird on NBA 2K Association. I'm going to get that guy back for less money. Do I care what it means? No. Do I think it's funny because the name's funny? Yeah. Does it mean that I don't understand what it means, so I'm not going to watch the NBA? No. I don't watch the NBA because I don't like basketball. But that's a different story because the bird rule is big on the association we do. But again, NFL has some weird cap restrictions and things like that, and you never see people like, "Oh, I don't understand it, so I'm never going to watch it." Right? Like, again, it's one of those things that you see the same 5 Twitter accounts like it's too complicated, so nobody's ever going to love MLS. It's like, calm down, brother. Like, go outside.
they think they're the front office and they got to make the decisions. It's like
Yeah,
who
literally.
cares if you don't understand the roster rules? Like, just leave it. enjoy and just watch the teams play.
Yeah, like go outside, have a nice deep breath of fresh air. It's gonna be okay. I promise. But I also, and you kind of alluded to this as well, I kind of doubt the impact that it would make on these rosters, right? Like it's definitely a nostalgia signing. You think about these players who are in the twilight and trying to hold, end their career at the club they started, whatever, right? Player, and I use Nico Ladera, you brought him up as an example, like super decreased impact last year in the same number of minutes. To bring him back for that nostalgia's sake, and not saying that it definitely would have happened, but just an example, it would have handicapped Seattle even more, who are struggling in the Western Conference right now, to have that sort of money tied up in a player who won't be contributing to you. Now, again, is Nico Ladero a one-off? Maybe. He's not really doing brilliant things at Orlando, but then again, nobody is. It's like and you mentioned it, and the article mentioned it. When we're talking about the players we want to sign, we're not looking to bring in players for nostalgia purposes anymore. This isn't MLS 2.0. We're looking for impact players, the Cucho Hernandez's, the Jonathan Rodriguez's, as I'm looking over here, the João Klaus, as I'm looking at the St. Louis SKC game, the, Eric Tommy, right? Those sorts of signings are super big for this league. Do we really need to put money into holding on to players that are either not going to contribute or are only going to be there for nostalgia's sake? I don't think so. Now, here's the deal. There is somebody, through the Twitter sphere has made some decent arguments in favor of this, where it's not the worst thing in the world. Again, it's not needed, but it's not the worst thing in the world, where it could be a really good way to hold on to a fan favorite player and continue that interest in the team, right? We talk about a lot when we're growing up and we're watching sports like the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, right? People watch when they start, for the most part, for individuals, right? So maybe it's a player who is the best player on the team, right? Maybe it is a player who came up and made a big play in a big game. You're like, I'm going to remember him forever. He's now my favorite player. Maybe you were cooler than everybody else and grew up thinking Jason Phillips of the New York Metropolitans was the GOAT and wanted to see him every time the Mets played. If you were cool, that would have been something you did. Now, I'm sure
That's a weird link. Weird link.
Wow, I'm not like alluding to anything, but the coolest kids knew Jason Phillips, the GOAT. When these players leave, it hurts a little bit, right? I saw somebody the other day on NFL Twitter when Stefan Diggs got traded. Little, 8-year-old kids was like, "Oh, Stefan Diggs is on the team," and he's crying, right? And after I laughed a little bit to see Bills fans in tears, I was like, okay, that like makes sense. You've got a favorite player now. You're really, really upset. And again, when you're not, when the league is not, your parents' favorite league, right? We've talked about that a lot too, where your parents are usually a reason why you support something. When this is something you're doing and you're following just for one player, once that guy's gone, it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't stick around, right? So to keep players around like that is not the worst thing in the world in that sense. But the other thing that I found was there's this idea of revenue just for having people on the roster, right? So Carlos Vela is a good example. 5th highest selling jersey in the league last year. If you had to bring him on a cap hit of 600K, 650, 657, 245.23 cents, right? Like it may not be worth it at that point. But if you bring him back and it's only a 200K cap hit, maybe your revenue from his jersey sales make it worth it, right? So now you're weighing the options of, okay, is it worth to take him on a low hit to just sell jerseys, and boom, now I've got more money to work with in the club, right? And then fans come back to see him. They go to the ballpark. They buy merch. They buy food. There's another side to this that is more than just old players on rosters. It's a very small side. I'm still on the side of I don't think we need it. But there are good and bads tied to this, which, again, you'll see with everything that happens in MLS. And usually once you jump on Twitter, you'll recognize that the people who see it on the good side or the bad side usually have a bias on it. So it doesn't really matter. We're just out here sharing thoughts.
Yeah, I'm still on the side of not a fan of the rule. I think we're grasping to try to find some use for the rule, and I don't doubt that there is a use in that regard of bringing a player on for jerseys and for fan interest and whatnot. But I think that's a weak reason to introduce the rule. So and I think you're on the same wavelength as well. I think both of us are not fans of bringing in the rule. But like you said, at the end of the day, who really cares? Like if they implement it, it's not ruining anything. It's not the end of the world at all.
Yeah, well, and that was kind of where I was like, I tried to find some, again, when these things happen, I usually try to find some reason why it would be a good thing, some reason why it would be a bad thing. As we've mentioned with a lot of the roster rules here, the casual fan nor the diehard fan are going to look at this and be like, if this rule is put in or if this rule is not put in, it will determine if I'm going to watch the league or not. Like, that's just not happening. The only people who are making that argument are the people who are never going to watch the league anyway. So when you see it, you say, okay, buddy, and then you move on, right?